Leonard A. Funk Jr. never looked like the kind of guy who would charge headfirst into a room full of armed Germans and solve the problem with an MG-42 he didn't even bring to the party. He wasn't carved from marble or wrapped in myth. He was a Pittsburgh kid who found his way into the 508th Parachute Infantry Regiment, an outfit with the 82nd Airborne that prided itself on being the sort of unit where you didn't need polished boots as much as you needed a healthy disregard for your own safety. Funk fit in immediately. By late 1944, he wasn't some fresh-faced rookie learning how to jump without screaming. He was a seasoned NCO who had already survived the worst kind of on-the-job training Europe could offer. The 508th didn't jump on D-Day itself, but they poured into Normandy right behind the first wave, fighting through hedgerows that felt like someone had weaponized shrubbery. Then came Operation Market Garden, Montgomery's big swing that was supposed to end the war, but instead turned a lesson on how optimism can get you shot from more directions than physics should allow. Through all of it, Funk built a reputation for being relentlessly competent. Not flashy, not reckless, just the sort of leader who treated a firefight like an unpleasant household chore. Annoying, messy, and best handled aggressively so you could get on with your day. His men trusted him because he didn't rattle. If the enemy opened up with a machine gun, Funk simply dropped into a crouch, took stock, and figured out how to make their day worse. Then came December 1944, and Germany's last great surprise we're not done yet moment, the Battle of the Bulge. The Ardennes had always been beautiful in a postcard sort of way. Dense trees, rolling hills, the sort of place an outdoorsman might enjoy. Then winter hit, the Germans counterattacked, and suddenly it became a frozen hellscape where American soldiers fought waist deep in snow while wondering which designer of military uniforms thought thin wool was the answer to sub-zero temperatures. The 82nd Airborne was rushed in to plug holes, counterattack, stabilize fronts, and gently perform the tactical equivalent of duct tape on a sinking boat. Funk's unit was in constant motion, clearing crossroads, retaking villages, and conducting patrols that often ended with more frostbite than sleep. This is where Funk's legend takes shape. Not in the big sweeping offenses, but in the cold, chaotic days when nothing was certain and everything had a way of going sideways. And here, deep in the Ardennes, that's where he'd walked into a situation so absurd, so lopsided, and so wildly dangerous that it would become one of the most celebrated acts of paratrooper insanity in U.S. military history. When the winter was at its worst, Funk was at his best, and the Germans were about to learn that firsthand. The Ardennes in January 1945 didn't feel like a battlefield so much as a punishment detail issued by Mother Nature. The snow wasn't picturesque, it was the kind that swallowed your boots, froze your canteen solid, and made every rusted fence post look like a sniper waiting to ruin your afternoon. The Germans had thrown everything they had into their last big push, and the Americans were scrambling to shove it all back where it came from. Into this swirling cold came the 508th PIR and Leonard Funk, an NCO who treated bad odds the way a mechanic treats a stubborn bolt. Apply pressure until it stops being a problem. Funk's platoon spent those weeks moving from one miserable fight to another. If you could name a textbook infantry task, probing patrol, hasty defense, village clearing, counterattack, they did it, usually while half frozen, half exhausted, and entirely annoyed. The kind of annoyed that makes a paratrooper particularly dangerous, because airborne units don't like being ignored, and they like losing even less. The Germans weren't gentle opponents. Volksgrenadiers, SS units, remnants of panzer formations, they all came tearing through the woods looking for weak spots. And every time they found the 508th instead, they got the kind of welcoming committee that made them reconsider all their life choices. Funk was in the middle of it constantly, directing fire, repositioning squads, and keeping his men moving even when visibility was so bad you could lose sight of someone by blinking too slowly. One small village after another fell into this grinding pattern. Enter under fire, kick out the Germans, take a few prisoners, move on before the next wave arrived. It was war at its most stripped down. No grand maneuvers, no sweeping breakthroughs, just relentless violence until one side couldn't stand anymore. By late January, the German offensive was faltering, and American units pushed to retake pockets of resistance, stubbornly hanging on in farmhouses, crossroads, and half-blown out buildings. The mission that would define Funk came during one of these supposedly routine operations. The 508th was clearing scattered enemy positions, grabbing prisoners as they went, and trying to stitch the front back together. Funk and his men were tasked with taking a cluster of buildings and securing any Germans inside, a job that sounded simple enough, which should have been the first red flag. Because if there was one iron rule in the Ardennes, it was this: nothing was ever as simple as it looked. especially not in winter, especially not when the enemy was desperate, and especially not when Leonard Funk walked into a village that was about to explode into one of the most chaotic hostage situations of the entire war. The stage was set, the snow was deep, the Germans were cornered, and Funk was about to discover that routine in the Battle of the Bulge meant prepare to be surprised in the worst possible way. The village the 508th moved into that morning didn't look like much, just another cluster of stone houses, a barn, a few sheds, and enough blown-out windows to suggest it had changed hands more than once. But it held Germans, and that meant it needed clearing. Funk and his men moved in under scattered rifle fire, the kind that pops off from an attic window and disappears before you can figure out who to blame. By the time the shooting died down, they had rounded up a sizable batch of enemy soldiers, more than 80, a mix of infantry, stragglers, and a few stubborn holdouts who had to be coaxed out of cellars with the universal language of grenades. Funk placed a small guard detail over them, standard procedure. The Germans were cold, hungry, demoralized, and very much aware that the war was sliding away from them. None of them looked like the fight left in them type. So Funk left a handful of men to keep them covered while he pushed ahead with a small team to chase down whatever pockets of resistance still lingered on the edge of town. It didn't take long. A skirmish, a couple shots, a hurried surrender, then quiet. Too quiet, in the way soldiers hate. The unnatural quiet that means someone somewhere is doing something stupid. As Funk made his way back to the main building where the POWs were held, that feeling settled in. The kind of gut twist that tells you reality is about to disappoint you. He pushed open the door and instantly realized everything had gone spectacularly wrong. The guards he left behind were no longer in control. They weren't even standing. They were hostages, hands up, rifles yanked away, surrounded by Germans who had somehow flipped the situation on its head. The POWs had overpowered the guards, seized their weapons, and were now pointing them at anyone wearing an American uniform. You could have heard a pin drop if not for the muffled breathing of 80 armed men trying to figure out whether they wanted to fight, negotiate, or shoot first and hope for the best. Funk froze for half a second, not out of fear, but because he was doing the mental math. He was outnumbered nearly 20-1 in just the immediate room. Add the rest of the building, and the odds became laughable. The German commander spotted him and barked an order. Several rifles swung toward Funk and the men behind him. One German stepped forward, weapon raised, and snarled the command no soldier ever wants to hear. Hände hoch! Hands up. Funk's men hesitated behind him. One wrong move and someone would panic, either side, and the whole place would erupt in a bloodbath. Funk slowly lifted his hands, completely calm, completely unreadable. The Germans figured they'd regained control of the situation. They had not. Because this was Leonard Funk, an NCO whose entire career had been built on solving impossible problems with abrupt and violent clarity. And in about 3 seconds, he was going to rewrite the definition of overmatched. The disaster was set, the trap had been sprung, and Funk was about to spring one of his own. Funk stood in the doorway with his hands raised, surrounded by nearly 100 Germans who looked like they couldn't decide whether to shoot him, brag about capturing him, or just collapse from nerves. The German commander, some overconfident sergeant who clearly thought he'd just pulled off the comeback of the war, jabbed a submachine gun toward Funk's face and barked at him to step forward. His tone said he thought he was in charge. His eyes said he had no idea who he was dealing with. Funk moved slowly, calmly, like a man resigned to the situation. A step forward, another, hands high. His men behind him stayed still, hearts pounding so hard they could probably feel it in their teeth. 80 Germans, armed again, crammed into a room meant for 20, adrenaline pumping through the air like static. A hostage crisis with no negotiations and no plan. And Funk just kept walking. He wasn't smiling, wasn't grimacing, wasn't giving anything away. Just a paratrooper who'd spent too much time in too many bad situations to show fear now. But while his face stayed blank, his mind was a machine. He noticed the angle of the German commander's gun, slightly off center. He noticed the MG-42 propped near the wall, close enough to grab, if you lived long enough to grab it. He noticed how tightly clustered the Germans were, bunched up like they were posing for the world's worst unit photo. He reached the point of no return, 2 feet from the German commander. The man's weapon was practically touching Funk's chest. Funk's hands were still up, still surrendering, still compliant. And then he wasn't. It happened in a blur. One of those battlefield moments where anyone watching would later swear the entire world paused for just a heartbeat because reality couldn't keep up. Funk lunged forward, slapped the barrel aside, and fired point blank. The German commander dropped like a sack of bricks that had just learned about gravity for the first time. Before the rest of the room could process what had happened, Funk was already moving. He dove for the MG42, ripping the weapon from its rest with the kind of strength you only get when the alternative is die immediately. The Germans scrambled, a mix of shouting, swearing, and panicked fumbling as they tried to decide whether to shoot, run, or yell louder. Funk didn't give them the chance. He squeezed the trigger. The MG42 didn't fire so much as detonate. Its infamous 1,200 rounds per minute roar turned the room into a blender. The sound alone was so violent and so sudden that several Germans didn't even reach for their weapons. They reached for their ears. Bullets ripped through the cramped space, punching into walls, beams, furniture, and anyone stupid enough to still be standing. Germans dove into corners. They slammed into each other trying to escape. Some dropped instantly, others screamed, others froze, pinned by a force of gunfire so overwhelming it didn't feel human. Funk swept the weapon in a brutal arc, not wildly, not recklessly, but with deliberate, murderous precision. This wasn't panic, this wasn't adrenaline. This was an NCO who understood close quarters dominance in its purest form, maximum violence in minimum time. His men finally snapped out of shock and joined in. Rifles cracked, pistols barked, and the entire building turned into a thunderstorm of muzzle flashes. You couldn't see more than a few feet through the smoke. You didn't need to. Funk wasn't shooting at shapes. He was shooting at movement. A German lunged for a doorway. Funk cut him down. Two more tried to rally toward a rifle rack. Funk pivoted and shredded the space before they got close. One dropped to his knees screaming. Funk kicked the weapon away and kept firing. The chaos lasted seconds, maybe 20, maybe 30, long enough for the Germans' counter-revolt to completely collapse. Short enough that none of Funk's men could later agree on exactly what happened first. They only knew how it ended. The surviving Germans, over 80 of them, threw down their weapons as if they were red hot. Hands shot into the air. Some yelled, "Nix schreiben!" Others sobbed. Others simply stared at Funk in a sort of horrified awe, like they were realizing they had just challenged a force of nature. The smoke drifted, the echoes faded, and there he stood, a paratrooper holding an MG42 he had just reclaimed with bare-knuckle audacity. And now the part every viewer wonders about. Was what he did legal? Was that perfidy? Quick answer, no, not even close. Perfidy, under the laws of war, means pretending to surrender for the purpose of luring the enemy into a trap. Funk didn't do that. He didn't wave a white flag, he didn't negotiate terms, and he sure as hell didn't set up an ambush. He walked into a hostage crisis where the enemy already held every advantage. His hands-up moment wasn't a ruse designed in advance. It was a split-second survival reaction to imminent execution. And under the laws of war, reacting to being captured doesn't count as perfidy. It counts as self-defense. That's the legal version. The soldier version is simpler. They had his men, they had guns, they weren't letting anyone walk out alive. So Funk changed the outcome. By the time the room went silent, the tally was brutal. 21 Germans killed, over 80 subdued and recaptured, all the American guards freed. Funk lifted his finger off the trigger, handed the MG42 to a stunned private like he was returning a borrowed shovel, and surveyed the room with the calm of someone who had just taken out the trash, not survived a gunfight that should have killed him 10 times over. Then, with a deadpan tone only combat veterans can pull off, he said something along the lines of, "Well, let's move." Because to Funk, the fight was never the point, the mission was. And the mission wasn't done yet. When Higher Command finally arrived to inspect the village, they expected the usual. A handful of prisoners, maybe a few scattered rifle shots, and a platoon of cold, miserable paratroopers complaining about their feet. What they walked into instead looked like the aftermath of a small, localized apocalypse. Germans, dozens of them, were sitting in neat rows under guard, all of them shaking like they'd just been introduced to the concept of mortality in a very personal way. The bodies of 21 others lay where they'd fallen, and the building still smelled of gunpowder, broken plaster, and very bad decisions. An officer turned to one of Funk's privates and asked what happened. The private pointed at Funk, who was leaning against a wall cleaning his weapon like he'd just finished sweeping out a garage. The officer raised an eyebrow. The private shrugged. "He did it," he said. "Mostly him." That wasn't an exaggeration. It wasn't even hero worship. It was simply the most efficient summary anyone could give. Statements were gathered, reports were written, witnesses struggled to put what they'd seen into words that didn't sound like they were describing a fever dream. It became clear very quickly that Funk hadn't just reacted quickly. He'd single-handedly prevented a massacre of American soldiers, recaptured nearly 100 Germans, and neutralized a threat that could have destabilized the entire operation in that sector. One officer reportedly called it a tactical miracle. Funk called it fixing a mistake. The man had the humility of someone who genuinely believed anyone else in his boots would have done the same thing. His men disagreed, loudly and often. The recommendation for Medal of Honor moved fast by military standards. Commanders up the chain underlining the same phrases: extraordinary heroism, singular initiative, conspicuous gallantry, and the unofficial but universally understood description: he walked into a bad situation and solved it with terrifying efficiency. The citation, once polished into official language, captured the essence of what he'd done. Faced with overwhelming enemy force and imminent loss of friendly lives, Funk refused to surrender, refused to break, and turned the tide of the engagement through sheer will and decisive action. When the medal was finally awarded in 1945, Funk looked as uncomfortable as any combat veteran forced into a dress uniform and told to stand still while important people say nice things. He listened politely, shook hands, posed for the official photo, and then tried to slip out as quietly as possible. Heroics were fine on the battlefield, but public ceremonies were another matter entirely. After the war, Funk didn't chase the spotlight or write memoirs. He didn't become a public speaker or reinvent himself as a professional hero. He stayed in the Army Reserve, serving until retirement, and spent the rest of his life working with veterans groups, community organizations, and anyone who needed a steady hand from a man who'd seen more chaos than most people can imagine. Those who knew him described him the same way his wartime buddies did: calm, humble, grounded, and almost allergic to bragging. When younger paratroopers eventually learned his story, as all airborne soldiers inevitably do, they reacted the way his own men had: a mix of disbelief, awe, and the grim realization that they would never have the nerve to pull off something so wildly aggressive. Funk never encouraged the mythologizing. He insisted he wasn't special, just in the right place with the right training and the wrong set of enemy soldiers who picked a very bad day to try something bold. By the time he passed in 1992, Funk had long since become airborne folklore, not because he sought it, but because anyone who heard the story knew it belonged to the pantheon of paratrooper legends. His name sits alongside the greats not for a lifetime of theatrics, but for one moment of perfect clarity under impossible pressure. A split second where surrender wasn't an option, hesitation wasn't acceptable, and action was the only path forward. His legacy isn't a romanticized lesson about bravery or courage. It's sharper than that, more pragmatic, more brutally honest. It's the reminder that sometimes the world hands you a situation so catastrophically unfair that the only way out is to hit back faster and harder than anyone thinks is reasonable. Funk understood that instinctively. And on a freezing morning in the Ardennes, surrounded by armed enemy soldiers who thought they had won, he proved it. I'm Dave. I appreciate you watching. Please subscribe, like, comment, and share. And until next time, stand tall.
And he's a Dave, dude. Dave's got to stick together, you know what I mean?